we're talking motorsports right now. It is beloved around the world because fast cars, right? Here in the U.S., NASCAR is the country's most popular racing series. So I want to start with the intersection, Steve and Ryan, of NASCAR and pop culture, because stock car racing has been popular in certain parts of the U.S., the southeastern part of the U.S., for a long time. You've got a diehard fan base in places like Florida and North Carolina. And thanks to Hollywood and TV executives, it's really broadened out. 20 years ago, it was Talladega Nights. More recently, it's Netflix series like Full Speed or even Formula One Drive to Survive. So, Steve, let me start with you. What is distinctive about the way in which NASCAR taps into the cultural moment and larger trends beyond just sports?
Yeah, first of all, it's a pleasure to be here. You bring up the NASCAR Full Speed, which was the Netflix show that we did, which was a 5-episode series that debuted in February, and it detailed our playoffs, our 10-race playoffs, which we start again this weekend in Atlanta. And I think for us, it was really important because it opened things up to a new audience. So the last 3 years, our audience has become far more female, far younger, and much more diverse. 80% of the new fans that are coming fall into one of those three segments. The Netflix series was, among others that we do, because we do a lot in entertainment, was one of those that really allowed us to find an audience where they were, right? Which is important, because if you don't go where they are, they'll never find you. And I think that was a really good opportunity for us. Content and content creation is huge for us. So we just opened up a new productions facility in January, and it's going to be a game changer for us. And so, Ryan was the star of the show last year because he got to hoist the big trophy.
He's a 2023 champion, Ryan. Congratulations.
Oh, thanks.
You are a third-generation driver, right? So
Yeah.
your father, your grandfather, they all raced.
Yeah.
How has NASCAR changed during that time? Obviously, you weren't racing before then, but I'm curious to get from your take since this is part of your lineage.
Yeah, well, like Steve said, thanks everyone for coming out. It's a pleasure to be here, get to tell you a little bit about our world. And Talladega Nights is 100% true, by the way. I grew up around the sport, of really just motorsports in general. And, when I was born, my dad was already racing. My dad was a dirt track racer in Ohio from the 80s and 90s. And before him, his dad, he was a dirt track racer from the 60s all the way to the 2000s. So I kind of saw all this progression and growing up, as a young kid, admiring the sport just because it's what my dad did at the time and it's all I wanted to do. And I feel like me being young and now being a part of it, I've seen that transition of, like Steve said, we have grown this sport leaps and bounds for what I ever thought it would be. Whether it's, going to new places, going to new countries, finding different audiences, you have to grow. If you don't grow, you're going to dissolve, and even my dad said to me, I never thought you guys would be going where you are, whether it's racing on the streets of Chicago, going to Mexico to race, just all these new avenues of fans, and I think that was the biggest thing is how do you appeal to somebody who doesn't know anything about your sport? I feel like that's the hardest thing, and it's the hardest thing for me, like even as a driver, trying to get new people to come to the sport to watch it. You have to get there. You have to see it in person because you cannot relate to it on TV.
So I want to pick up on that point because one thing NASCAR is very proud of is the fan experience. It's very different from attending a basketball game or a baseball game. You're not at the game, you're kind of in it, right? Walk us through the different things that fans can do at an actual NASCAR race. Has anyone, by the way, attended a NASCAR race in person here? Okay, I see a couple of hands, but that means
we gotta
not
change
everyone. Okay, Ryan's going to work on that. But
I'll be guests of Ryan Blaney.
Walk us through what fans get to do that they can't at a regular professional sports game.
Yeah, well, I feel like, the difference is, you said it perfectly. I feel like the experience for the fan is really, really important. Obviously the on-track or on-court, on-field, that's what people come to see, but what is your experience outside of that? So I feel like for the longest time, and maybe Steve, you can correct me, but the access wasn't like it is now, right? What it used to be. And, 10 minutes before we start the race, fans can walk on the racetrack. You're seeing the actual surface we're on. You can be in the garages and see these teams work on what they're doing, how these cars are prepared. You're meeting us, you're meeting the drivers right before I strap into the race car. Last week, I took a picture with a fan right before I strapped my helmet on. Like, I'm about to do my job, and I'm signing an autograph and taking a picture with you. So I feel like those are the special moments that fans put in their core memory and kind of in their hearts, like, hey, that was a unique experience. And I feel like we've done a great job as a sport in welcoming the diehard fan and also welcoming the new fans as well.
No, and I think, moreover, I think to Ryan's point, access is a big differentiator of our sport relative to what I'll call stick and ball sports. I would even say even other motorsports, like F1's fairly exclusive. What happens if you're in the paddock and no one's on the grid? It is just a different animal. I think the other thing that separates our sport is if you think about going to an NFL game, you're going to, potentially tailgate. You get there in the morning and you make some things. Our fans are there like 4 days before, right? And they're camping. And camping is a huge thing for our sport. You meet, folks that come year after year after year, and it's very welcoming. It's very, everyone's having a good time. It's like a big party, right? And then there's a race that breaks out, right, on Sunday. And it's just, I think that experience, you'll have, like at a Talladega or a Daytona, you'll have, 15,000 people camping for 4 days, and they'll have concerts and different things that they can do that really are different. And to Ryan's point, on race day, fans have opportunity to be on the field of play. They can go to the garage and see the cars being worked on. It's just the experience thing, and the opportunity to think differently about that experience is great. There's another thing that we will call, we call the midway, which lots of, games and, folks that are doing different things where you can race in simulators, and just a really cool family-friendly opportunity.
It goes beyond the race, right? It's a whole package.
It is.
So, Ryan, you are one of the faces of the sport. Clearly, for 2023, you were the champion. You just raced in the Southern 500 this past weekend, right?
Yeah, well, I'm not really.
Why do you say that?
I ran like 2 laps and got wrecked, but it's, those things happen.
This was meant to be like a 4-hour-long race with more than 350 laps?
Yeah, save some time. Yeah, I got home early, but yeah, that's really just, that's how our sport goes sometimes, unfortunately.
You got home and you were able to watch the rest of the race?
Yeah, it's kind of weird, but yeah, yeah.
Can you take us through what happened? Because it looked like another guy took you out, and I know that one of the things NASCAR does is kind of give access to fans, but we have you here. I wanted to hear from you what happened and how that just kind of unfolded.
Yeah, wrecks happen all the time. That's just part of the sport. Essentially what happened is a guy pretty much spun out in front of me, and he kind of just crashed into me. Unavoidable contact, I guess you can call it. But yeah, those days happen and they stink, right? You prepare all week for this thing and you're getting ready to go and you're mentally prepared for running 500 miles, and I ran 3. So it's like, all right, you've prepared all this stuff. Everybody at your race team has blood, sweat, and tears into this car like they do every week, and it's over like that. So how do you forget it? How do you move on and accept it and then go prepare for the next week? So I've always said race car drivers have good short-term memory, because it's just, you're going to have those days that are unexpected. And just, it's some similarities to other sports,
Sure.
But I think other sports, unless you get hurt, like you're not going home early and watching the rest of the race, like we are when there's no car to be driven. I have no use at the racetrack anymore.
There are cameras and mics linked to you where they can hear you talking to your crew. Did you want to say anything that maybe the cameras didn't pick up?
No.
Well, that's the beauty. The camera, the mics will pick up anything, right?
Yeah.
So if he's he can talk to his crew chief. He obviously is talking to his spotter who's above watching the action to try to tell him what is happening on the racetrack around him. And then different things that he can talk to way better than I can, which is, hey, this line seems to be working better than another line. But I think that's the really cool thing about NASCAR, as well as all the telemetry or the data that's coming off the car that fans have access to.
Yeah.
You can understand what's happening, where they're braking, they're accelerating, different data models that they put together. And then just every car has a camera in it, so all the fans have access to Ryan's camera or someone else's camera, right? So they can see that Martin Truex was spinning out, and then Ryan gets collected in it.
Yeah.
And I think that's kind of a neat thing that draws the fans closer. What we try to do is create something that is unique and different for whatever turns you on. Like, so if you just want to watch the linear television, you can do that. If you want to do something, you want to watch something digitally and get more into the data and what's happening or different camera angles, et cetera, you can do that too.
Right,
so it's,
right.
We're trying to appeal to a wide audience and what it is, because, you know, some of them geek out on the, you know, on kind of the data and whatnot. Great, we can do that for you.
Let me pick up on that idea that you're trying to widen things out here, because your fan base, traditionally at least, kind of leans towards traditional Americana. Some would even say Republican men, specifically. There's a tension there, a natural tension of how do you retain that fan base, which is very devoted, while at the same time building it out and welcoming other people who may not know anything about it and don't fit into that mold. How do you think about doing that, especially as you look to expand to, you guys mentioned races in Mexico or in a city like Chicago?
Yeah. So I think, you know, what we're trying to do is we're trying to be bold and innovative in everything we do. And I think people think about, hey, you either serve one audience, which is a traditional audience, right, your traditional fan, or you serve a new fan. In our sport, I truly believe it's an and, right? So you can serve this fan. What do they want? They want great racing. They want great storylines. They want to hate one guy and love another guy. That's just kind of what the deal is, right? And so we can do that, right, and serve a new fan. So, for example, Ryan talked about going to Mexico City. So for the first time, NASCAR will go outside of our borders to race a cup race in Mexico. And we're really excited about what that means to advance the audience. We race in the streets of Chicago. 80% of the people last year when we went to Chicago to race that street race had never been to a NASCAR race. The LA Coliseum, which we ran for 3 years, we had an exhibition race there. We built a quarter-mile track inside the LA Coliseum, and 75% of the people who went to that race had never been to a NASCAR race. So it's broadening.
Yeah.
Did our regular fans or our traditional fans watch both those races? You bet they did. But we had other people come experience it, and it's important for us to do that. Mm-hmm. So we try to look at serving all audiences. So this year, the exhibition race called the Clash, which was in the LA Coliseum the last 3 years, will go to a small track in Winston-Salem, North Carolina, called Bowman Gray Stadium. Mm-hmm. And we will race there. So it's kind of a throwback, right? And then you go to Mexico City, and the schedule variation we have is important. And so what we want people to think about the brand of NASCAR is that the brand of NASCAR is changing. It's not what you think it's going to be.
Okay, gotcha.
And it's interesting I think the perception of the sport, right, is that it's older, white, male, Republican. Mm-hmm. 52% of our fan base is Republican, 48% is Democrat. So we have to break the stereotype of how people think about who our fan is, and that's what we're trying to do. But it's hard. Breaking stereotypes is difficult, right?
Yeah,
so
yeah.
In 2020, which is going to sound strange to a lot of people, we banned the Confederate flag from all of our facilities, right? A lot of folks said, well, why did it take so long? That's a good question. The timing needed to be right, and it was right. And so the stance that NASCAR took in 2020 on issues that were facing the country, and as we're having kind of a social reckoning at that time, we evolved to that. And we've evolved since that, right? So as we have more and more people that are coming to the sport that look different than I do, mm-hmm. I think it's important to be able to serve that fan where they are.
So more and more people coming to the sport, we're talking motorsports in general, and a lot of them are coming to the sport because of F1. I mentioned the Netflix series. That Drive to Survive has been super effective in building out a fan base in the U.S. F1 obviously very popular overseas. Is this a good thing or a bad thing for NASCAR? Ryan, what do you think?
The Drive to Survive F1?
Yeah, and it being like making such a splash.
I personally am a fan of all motorsports, right? As a racer, like I watch every motorsport out there just because I enjoy what that is, right? And I can relate to some of it, and I want to know the differences of it. I did think Drive to Survive was really big in getting a lot of motorsports fans, even though it might have been F1 in the Americas. I think our show, you know, that we did last year with Netflix, I think that was another step in kind of getting even more, because I think people kind of saw that show on Netflix for F1, and then we came out with ours, and they're like, oh, this is another racing show. It's a different series, but it showed a great inside look of how this operates. And I love watching things, you know, as an athlete myself, like the quarterback show, the receiver show. Like, I want to see what behind the scenes, how does your daily life operate as an athlete? And what are all the behind the scenes? Because the normal person just sees the on-field or on-track product on TV. They don't realize how much work goes into it behind the scenes, how many people are involved, all the prep work. And I feel like those shows on Netflix, they have shown hundreds of people that work in our race shops that never get to see the light of day from a camera perspective, all the hard work that they put in, all the prep work the drivers put in, the ups and downs of emotions that go through the season and the year and the playoffs especially. I think people like seeing that raw emotion, and I feel like it makes people connect better with that person. Maybe they're not just an athlete to you anymore, they're more of a person to you. And I feel like that's really grown our sport a lot. And I think that's a positive thing, no matter what it is. I mean, F1's great if you want to see cars riding a single file line the whole time. NASCAR, you're going to get way better racing, and maybe I'm biased, but I do feel like both of those shows have really helped show the behind the scenes and the raw kind of people that are involved in it, and the ups and downs and the trials and tribulations. People love drama, and those shows definitely showed it.
So no problems riding the coattails of the success of Drive to Survive?
I think for us, we look at it slightly differently. I think, to Ryan's point, in 2018, really all motorsports in this country were challenged, right? Starting in 2019, our growth started to come back, attendance, ratings, and we've seen that growth continue. We celebrate their success, right? And, you know, they did a television deal a couple years ago. It was $85 million domestically. We did a deal last year that was $1.1 billion. So we are the king of motorsports in this country. There's room for us and them in IndyCar and other forms of motorsports. And I think it lifts, you know, kind of tide lifting all boats.
So Ryan mentioned the scale of emotions that you see from these shows, also the scale of the teams involved in supporting a driver like Ryan. I want to talk a little bit about the teams, because when you look at NASCAR's business model, it runs kind of a franchise model, Steve. There are 36 charters handed out, so the same teams year after year are guaranteed entry to the races. And then you've got, I think, 4 independent teams that don't have charters and have to then qualify for the races, right? But the teams don't make money, and that's been one of the rubs. What are you doing to change that?
Sure. So we're in the midst of charters. We have charters as franchise light, guaranteed entry into a race, guaranteed revenue, a portion of it, and then they race for the other portion of the revenue. And the opportunity to create enterprise value, which is what the charters have brought to the race team. So we are in what I will consider to be the final throes of an extension of these charters for another 7 years. And really 2 things is driving more revenue or providing more revenue to the race teams, which is what we have offered to the teams, and then some form of cost containment. If you're able to do that and they're cash flow positive, which they should be collectively next year with this new deal financially, then it will continue to drive enterprise value for them. And so I won't get into what the values are today, but they are tens of multiples more than what they were even 5 years ago.
You mentioned extensions for another 7 to 8 years. I know some of the teams want the charters to become permanent so they can plan more effectively. They've got to pay for mechanics, sales staff, storage to house the cars, tires, fees, credentials, hospitality suites. What's the likelihood of permanent charters?
There won't be permanent charters. So like if you look at F1, they have something called a Concord Agreement. It's 5 years. So we want to make sure that we have the opportunity with our race teams at the end of this current agreement or whatever the future agreement's going to look like to make sure that we can evaluate for all stakeholders what this is going to look. So NASCAR has provided the teams with significantly more, or offered the teams significantly more money from a revenue perspective. We need to make sure that all stakeholders are getting what they need as part of this. So whether that's drivers, racetracks, teams, but the most important thing is, and this is a true thing, which is we need to make sure that race teams are healthy. And I know there are a lot of fans who don't think that having, they don't really care about charters, they don't care about healthy teams, but they should. And they should because it provides better racing for them, right?
Yeah.
They are the beneficiary of profitable teams. And so we want to work hand in hand with our race teams to make sure they are profitable and that the race teams and NASCAR and the tracks and our drivers are all helping to grow this sport collectively.
Thank you for answering that. Ryan, you're in the playoffs. I know that the last weekend's race was not great. You got 2 laps in, but how are you preparing for it? And how are you thinking ahead to the 2025 season when you guys have new distributors like Amazon, for instance, and Warner Brothers Discovery through TNT?
Yeah, I mean, from my standpoint, right, next year is next year, and it's great that we have these new partners coming on, like you said, with Amazon and others. That's more growth for the sport, I feel like. But yeah, this year we start our playoffs this week, and it's 10 weeks to the end, and all that's on my mind is how do we go back to back and try to win another championship, and how do you stay as hungry as what you did last year to try to win your first. And it's really weird, and it's funny that I feel hungrier to win my second than I did my first. And I don't know why that is. Maybe you taste the forbidden fruit and you want another bite of it or something. But like once you kind of get a feeling of how that is and what that all, feels like when you all have one collective goal and you achieve it, now you want it even more when you've done it. So hopefully we can do that again. But no, next year is going to be amazing from the schedules changes, where we're going to our different broadcast partners. I think that's amazing.
What's the race you're most looking forward to in 2025? Just very quickly.
Oh, gosh. I'm excited to go to Mexico City. I really am. The audience is going to be fantastic. They're obviously huge motorsports fans. And I'm just excited to see, as an athlete and a driver, like, that fuels us. Even though we don't necessarily feed off their energy like other sporting events, right? We don't hear the crowd.
There's other things going on.
Loud things going on. But that atmosphere before the race, like we talked about the fan access and things like that, you can feel that before the race, and you know if the energy's high or not. And I think that one might top all the races that we've had, or at least the ones that I've run in my 30 years of racing.